Hello, Augies Worldwide. I'm Dave Kassler, amateur radio call sign KE0OG, here with episode number 270 of Ask Dave. Today we're going to talk more about the Anytone D578UVIIIPro mobile radio. This is a DMR radio. Also, we'll do FM on two bands. That's the 2-meter band and the 70-centimeter band. And it's an amazingly capable radio. It's a $400 radio, $399.99. You can save a penny there. The screen looks remarkably like the screen for the D578UV handheld. And then the two radios are so much alike that the code plug from the D578 can fit this one right here. But this has got the 50 watts. It also has the addition of the 222 megahertz band. Now, I wrote to Daniel Kohanowitz, who is one of the key players at Bridgecom Systems, which is the USA distributor and the one in the USA who provides support. If you buy the radio from them, it's the same price as from other people, but they will give you support there out of their American headquarters in the center of the US. I asked him for a list of features, and I thought I'd just go over that list of features with you today. It's an amazing radio. And so far as I know, there are Chinese mobile rigs that provide DMR. This is the one that seems to be the big player right at the moment, but there are others out there. The Anytone brand, and I've tested the 878 UV, and I've taken a look at this here too. They're outstanding radios, really well done, every bit as solid as one of the Japanese radios, and really something to think about. Start out here with general features. It's a tri-band amateur DMR and analog, so it's got 2 meters, 144 to 148 megahertz. It's got 1.25 meters, which is 222 megahertz to 225 megahertz. That's a 3 megahertz wide band, wide open. There's not that much on that band in terms of repeaters. And then 440. The 440 band actually goes from 420 to 450. But that bottom 12 megahertz on there is mostly used by amateur television. So a lot of the radios that don't have the television capability will start at 430 megahertz and go up to 450. It's a fairly powerful radio. It is 50 watts on 2 meters. It's 45 watts on 70 centimeters. Now, I get the feeling, and I'm going to be honest about this, that the 1.25 meter is a bit of an add-on because it only goes up to 5 watts. What that means is, in order to do a true tri-band radio where you can get full power out on that 1.25, you'd have to be redesigning final amplifiers and stuff like that to get a lot of power out. And given that there is, as yet, not that much band activity, and may not be for a few years, they're fine with that. It has 4,000 channels. Now, the interesting thing about the channel, a channel, of course, is just like you would think of on any FM radio or on your handheld. It's a frequency with a bunch of attributes. You can put a name on it. It has a given frequency. You can go analog, you can go digital. But 4,000 channels. Now, what we're talking about here is not the fact that it can go on those channels, but memories. 4,000 channel memories. That's more than you'll ever use. I don't know that there are that many repeaters in the United States. that's a lot of channels. Now, note that these channels have to be used in groups. Now, the groups are called zones on a DMR radio, and so that's what they'll be called here. If it's an analog channel or if it's a DMR channel, it has to belong to a zone. So, well, that's fine. Okay, you set up one zone to cover everything if you've got just 5 or 6 repeaters that you're interested in. But some clubs have code plugs already for these things. And so for a given area, like say in the New York metro area or something like that, there could be hundreds of repeaters. And you need zones to make sense of all of that. By the way, if there's something called roaming in dealing with DMR, and that is that as you move from place to place, as you're moving from place to place, the radio will, for a given talk group, seek out the repeater that has the best signal for you. Now, it's a little fun to set up, but you get that set up and you can drive for quite a ways, and you'll end up switching repeaters while still being in the same talk group. So what's a talk group? A talk group is like a party line. You can, this is how DMR works. You talk in talk groups. You could do other things too, but let's just say you talk in talk groups. Like say there's a talk group for North America. And so if you go into any repeater, any DMR repeater that has that talk group available, you can go into that conversation. And there might be somebody in Seattle that has that same North American talk group. And if he talks in Seattle and you talk in New York, you're talking to each other, okay? And there are hundreds of talk groups. It goes so far here as to say that 10,000 talk groups can be programmed into the radio. One of the things you have to do is put the talk group you want to use into the radio, so that it can remember it when it goes out. I'm not sure there are 10,000 talk groups yet. There are groups like the Motorola Amateur Radio Club has set up some stuff, and then there's a very big network called Brandmeister that sets up these talk groups and gives out user IDs and things like that. Now, unlike something else, you know, it doesn't use your call sign as your ID. You have to get a numerical ID that's usually 7 digits long. And that's one of the next thing it talks about. This radio has storage for 200,000 individual contacts, digital contacts. Now, I have and this is public knowledge. It's in there. My DMR ID is 3108892, and so you have to get that ID, and there's an address you go to. Just do a little searching on Google and you can find it. But there are currently about 150 to 160,000 hams around the world who have gotten themselves digital IDs. Now, I remember when the Islands HD1 came out, one of its big selling points was it had 100,000 memory slots for digital contacts, and that would cover everybody. Well, at the time it did, but it's exploded. It reminds me a little bit of Bill Gates when, the memory maximum size for a personal computer was 64,000 bytes. He says, give them 640,000. That's a factor of 10. They'll never get up to that. Well, of course, everybody blew past that. And they will blow past the 200,000 worldwide at some point here. A given person only needs one number, even though they've got more than one radio, because they're only talking on one at a time. Now, this one has Bluetooth. What does Bluetooth do for you? Well, you can use a Bluetooth headset, so you're hands-free, but then you need a push-to-talk button of some kind, so they provide it. This is a little button, push-to-talk, okay? And They give you a little good grief, Velcro strap that you can put around a steering wheel or something like that to hold this where you would like to have it. Or you could put it on your belt or something like that, so you can do push to talk for that. You can set it up for Vox. I would do that only in a very quiet environment. And one of the problems with Vox is if you say anything, it will go out over the air. So if your kid comes running in the room and says, Daddy, the cat bit me, you know, that's all going to go out over the air. I really don't think Vox for VHF and UHF is a really good idea, but you can do it. The capability is here. And if you're doing a lot in, say, an emergency operations center, or you're acting as net control, say your ham club is providing communications for a local foot race, then it would be a very good thing to have. It could you could get your communications in and out very rapidly. Now this thing also has GPS. Now what's GPS good for? GPS is good for APRS, which is the Advanced Packet Reporting System. It's not the amateur packet reporting system. It's although it's used by amateurs extensively. There is an analog version of it that's usually on 14439. I think it is. And then there is a DMR version of it. And both of them feed into a worldwide system of keeping track of where hams are. They give you a GPS antenna. Now, how do I know that's an antenna? Because the end of it right here is a microwave connector. And there's two ways you can do this in general. I mean, two ways it can be done. One is you put the GPS receiver in here, and then you put some electronics in here so that it will send down the cable just like an RS-232 will send down the signals, the words from the GPS indicator, and put them into the radio. That's like how QRP Labs does things. This appears to be just an antenna, and so you're going to get the RF. I presume there's a preamp in here. You're going to get the RF down in here and let the radio do the interpretation of the GPS signal. Now, so that means that your position can be sent out using either the DMR version of GPS, which is when you transmit, it'll go out over a subcarrier, or you can do just the traditional analog APRS. By and large, what you're doing there, it's what's called a tracker. That's a function in APRS where you transmit to others, to the world, your location on GPS. It's not the same as gathering in other people's locations on GPS. Now, there may be some additional functionality on DMR where you might be able to do that. But one of the things I want to point out, this is a separate antenna. Okay, this normally it's flat on the bottom, which makes it a problem for this. But on the inside of a windshield, stick this thing up there so that it's out where it can get that GPS signal. If your GPS receiver is built into the radio, think of it as taking a real GPS receiver and shoving it in the glove compartment. You're not going to get a very good signal. This way you get a good signal in there and you get reliable GPS. If you are at home and setting this up, which I will be doing this coming week, setting it up as one of my base station radios, then I would just take this thing over and tape it on the window and let it get the static data from there, so you'd have that static data. The thing will do full duplex. Now, full duplex is if you're doing cross mode, if you're like transmitting on 440 and listening on 440 to, say, 2 meters to to 70 centimeters, you can be transmitting one while receiving on the other and get full duplex. Full duplex is where you're hearing and sending at the same time. Sort of like a telephone. Your telephone is full duplex. Now, one of the things that Bridgecom Systems does with their radios is something they call Bridgecom University. It's just a selection of videos and training material and stuff to really help you get the most out of DMR. They've got a lot of videos up there on the 878, which is the handheld, almost all of which will apply to this radio, and they've got some additional videos up there on this radio. Now, they charge for access to this. However, if you buy a radio from them, you get it for free. Okay, and this is something about Bridgecom that you will not get from another vendor, is access to this extensive educational system here. Now, they want to point out there's a cross mode and cross mode repeat. So you can come in on FM, go out. You know, this thing will act like a repeater of sorts. It's a crossband repeater. Crossband, and so you can operate at crossband. You can listen on 2 meters, transmit on 440, or vice versa. You can, on 2 meters, be FM and doing the crossband, but on a 440 being DMR. DMR does have a local person-to-person mode. Okay, that's tier 1. Tier 2 is when we go through repeaters. It has a 1-year limited manufacturer's warranty, and it has all the FCC paperwork, so it complies with Part 15. This is an FCC radio with an FCC number. That number is T4K, which is the designator for Anytone, or its parent, whoever its parent is. The D578UVIIIPro is the way it's been type accepted. Now, here are the things that are in the box. You get the radio, a 1-year limited warranty, which you can deal with through Bridgecom Systems. The Bluetooth module is built in. You do get the external little Bluetooth push-to-talk button. The handheld microphone has got lots of numbers and stuff on it. So here's the equivalent of the keypad that you would have on the 878UV. A lot of these buttons, I think it said 10, but I suspect it might be just 9, are programmable. So you can program a function into any one of those. The mobile mounting bracket that you would use to mount it in your car or in your station, I'm going to mount mine up under this shelf right here. The DC cable with the fuse, there's 2 areas of fusing. In the little short cable that comes on this, there's a fuse in the hot, okay, in the plus line. In the extended fuse, which is designed to go all the way to the battery, it's a little short for that, but there's a fuse in both leads. And that's because there are failure modes where you can have the entire return to battery going through the one line, and it will pop the fuse if it does that, because it's much too much current to be putting through there. Okay, it has the USB programming cable right here, and it has with the push to talk button, there's a little charging cable right here. It's kind of weird. It's got 1 going to 2, and this is just a charging cable, and it happens to be the one that will charge the little push to talk button right there. There is it says programming software. That's obviously not included in the box. You go on to Bridgecom Systems or to the worldwide Anytone site and download that software. Now, note that RT Systems and Chirp and stuff like that don't really do DMR programming. I talked to the guy from RT Systems and asked him when he was going to start adding digital, and he sort of hemmed and hawed. because, you know, with more and more digital radios out there, especially the explosion of interest in DMR, he's going to have to, or he's going to be left behind. And I think they realize that, because I'm starting to see now some D-Star programming in RT systems. Chirp doesn't do digital, and I think that's a shame. They need to. But you get the programming software for free. Now, this is different from the Japanese radios. The Japanese radios, you've got to pay for the programming cable, and then you got to pay for the programming software. Whereas that all comes free with nearly every Chinese radio. And as I mentioned, spare fuses in the GPS antenna. Now, in terms of dimensions, this thing is the same size as a classic Japanese mobile radio. In fact, it practically fit in the mounting bracket. I haven't tried it. It looks like the dimensions are a little different, but it's just the same size as my Yaesu 7800 over here. So it's not some weird size. Now, there's a radio by a company called B-Tech, or Baofeng Tech, where they sell a radio that they is smaller. It's a much smaller little mobile unit. Talked to a friend of mine who uses that for his Jeep because he wanted the smaller one. But this is a regular size mobile radio. Now, it says it has a 1.77-inch color LCD display there. That's the same size as the one that's on the handheld. That's why I'm thinking that much of the guts of this is the same as is in the handheld. That's not bad. That handheld is a really nice handheld, but they've got the extra power in here. So I already went over the frequencies it covers. IF channel width selectable, IF channel, it's not IF channel, that's the deviation for the analog, which is the FM signal, can be either 12.5 or 25 kilohertz. Now, 25 kilohertz is what's called wideband. A lot of the mobile radio business in the United States has moved to narrow band, where they've cut that deviation in half to 12.5 kilohertz. In the U.S., standard amateur practice is wideband, 25 kilohertz. There are, however, some areas where they are so congested that they are going to the so-called narrow band, which is the 12.5. And all radios, including my little Yaesu here that I've had for years, will do the narrow bandwidth. Now, on DMR, the bandwidth is 12.5 kilohertz, okay? And so you can put two DMR signals into the bandwidth taken up by a single analog signal. Now, this is Tier 1 and Tier 2. There are 3 tiers in DMR. Tier 3 in DMR is some very involved complex switching. And we don't do that in amateur practice. We do Tier 1, which is radio to radio, and Tier 2, which is through a repeater or the internet backbone. Tier 2 requires that the signal, its digital signal, be time division multiplexed. There is a channel 1 and a channel 2. In any given 60 millisecond period of time, there's two 30 millisecond slots. The first slot is slot 1 or channel 1, and the other is slot 2. And they're time division multiplexed. So every 30 milliseconds you go switch from one to the other, to the other, to the other. All that synchronization is all automagic inside of the DMR. Okay. Now, let's see, and of course, analog FM. There is a WFM, wideband FM receiver. By wideband, I mean really wideband. These are 200 kilohertz wide channels. This is commercial FM. This radio will receive commercial FM. And you can do a lot with it. I think you can put in signals, or you can put in memories here for the FM. Now, this is a little weird and gets kind of stretching the FCC regulations, but you can put up to 5 DMR IDs in this thing, okay? You need one for your amateur radio. Well, this thing can transmit outside the amateur bands, and some public safety agencies have used these radios for their commercial purposes, or like public service or fire, sheriff, whatever. And it is possible. Now, of course, each of those radios need an ID, not an amateur ID, but need an ID in order to work with the system. And so there are some organizations that where, you know, like an ambulance group where a lot of the members are hams, they'll have the radio and they can just switch. Well, if I'm switching this ID, I'm a paramedic. If I'm switching this ID, I'm a ham. Okay, it'll do up to 5 of those. I am not certain that the FCC is quite completely happy with that, but I know that it has been done. Okay, well, I talked about 4,000 channels, 10,000 talk groups, 200,000 digital contacts, up to 250 zones, or memory banks, as he calls them here. So like I have a zone that I call Western Slope. That's where I live. I live on the western slope of Colorado, western slope of the Rocky Mountains. I have another zone in there called Quartzite, which is for when I go down to Quartz Fest. Okay, so you just flip zones and then you've got the channels that you need for that are in there. Now, can a channel be in more than one zone? Yes, absolutely it can. So if I had another zone called, say, Grand Junction, which is on the western slope, but I wouldn't be able to hit the Montrose repeater and stuff from there, I could exclude those from the Grand Junction. Okay, it will display the ID, the location, the country of your QSO partner. So whether they identify or not, you know who they are. And because what it does is it goes into that 200,000 slot memory, and it will find the information for your QSO partner. Now, the thing is, though, DMR is growing rapidly, so unless you update that list, which is not hard to do, you've got to update that list every few weeks or less to keep track of everybody who's in it. Okay, because otherwise it'll come back and it'll be somebody that's not in your list here. 2 time slots available. I talked about the 2 time slots, the 30 millisecond time slots. A color code is just a number. Color code goes from 1 to 10. I don't see any color in that. It doesn't say blue or green or violet. I know a lot of public service agencies will talk about the green network, the blue network, whatever, but I guess that's where the term came from, but it's just an extra number. It's sort of like almost like a CTCSS tone for a channel to have a color. If you're not transmitting the right color, you won't get through. The color code for most DMR work in the US is 1. Most, not all. Okay, transmit powers, we've noticed they're variable. I did note in previous testing that the 220 megahertz also had a 1 watt as well as a 5 watt. And it will do the tone burst of the 1750 hertz, which is used in Europe, but from what I understand, that's going away in favor of the tone squelch, which is CTCSS. Now, there's another tone squelch system known as DCS, which is not used in the United States. CTCSS is what's used. There's also tone signaling, which can be done with DTMF, dual tone multi-frequency. Those are your touch tone numbers. Either a 2-tone or a 5-tone. I've never seen that used, but I'm sure it is in some places. Now, I pointed out to somebody, if you want to do just simplex with somebody on FM, pick a CTCSS code to not only to transmit, but also to receive, so that if garbage comes up on the channel, it won't open your squelch. It'll only open when you get a signal from somebody who's sending the right CTCSS tone. It has the GPS receiver, simultaneous reception, analog digital or analog analog. In other words, it's dual watch. Okay. Many APRS parameters settable on radio without computer. I want to warn you about APRS. If you're going to be transmitting your location on APRS, don't speed. Because on the worldwide network, it shows you on a map along with your speed. And I've seen people whipping along on back roads out here in western Colorado, and I know they're way over the speed limit. There's no point, if you're going to be speeding, to make a record of it that anybody can go look up. Just word to the wise. There is a recorder in here that will record a DMR conversation. I mentioned the roaming function, the voice-operated Vox function, the Bluetooth interface. There's individual volume controls. It's dual watch, and each one you can change the volume of if you're doing dual watch. And it's about 15 amps max power draw. So with our station power supply here, the Samlex SEC 1235M, it'll support this in listen mode and your HF in listen mode, and one of them in transmit mode at a time, not both of them. So that gives you a little bit of a kind of an overview of what's available on this radio with a little bit of an explanation. And so we'll continue on. I'm going to mount this thing and see if I can have some QSOs with it. Looking forward to it. It's, like I said, a fabulous radio, a little pricey. It's $400. If you do buy it, you're going to pay the $400 wherever you go. Get it from Bridgecom Systems so you can get the support. And I think that's enough. I don't need to toot my own horn today. Until we next meet, 73.